Welcome to the EarthWorks Podcast, where our team will share the jargon of carbon from many of our turf friends from the past 30 years.
Hi, everybody. This is Joel Simmons, and this is the EarthWorks Podcast. Today, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to highlight some of our podcasts from the last year and a half. We have recently crossed the 70 podcast threshold, and we've had some wonderful guests on the show, a few of which have really taken off. I'm going to highlight them today. But I want to encourage everybody to subscribe to the EarthWorks podcast, because each week one of us from EarthWorks is providing some information, maybe some humor, maybe just a good conversation with a golf course superintendent or a sports turf manager. Today I want to take a couple of our most popular podcast and do a quick review, maybe a few minutes from each one of these, and talk about them. And as we try to do here at the podcast, we try to bring either an informative piece with a superintendent or a turf manager, or maybe something humorous like we're about to show with Armen Suny. And then, of course, we also have our really agronomy team, guys like Dave Wilber and Lawrence Mayhew and Bill McKibben, who we try to feature often so that we can bring really technical information to the podcast. But take a listen to this particular clip. I talked with Armen Suny a number of months ago, and if you know Armen, you know Armen is quite the showman and quite the storyteller, and we had a lot of fun. So this is a clip from one of the podcasts recently with Mr. Armen Suny. So this is your first job as a superintendent at Rolling Green.
Yeah, they hired me when I was 23.
They were looking for children. Is that what? That's 23. Well, you had a pretty good resume even by then. Agronomic, and in that area, White Manor is pretty impressive, and then obviously Marion.
Well, when I worked at Agronomic, I would go in. I sprayed greens.
Yeah.
And the whole time, and by hand with a gun, which.
Right.
Don't get me started on spraying.
Okay, good. We don't have enough time.
No. But I would go into Steve Campbell with what I thought we should spray each week. I had my list.
Yeah.
And we'd compare it. Because I thought I could figure it out.
And who won?
We were usually pretty close.
Oh, good.
I learned from him how he sprayed, so I could figure things out.
Yeah. So after you go to Rolling Green, now you're moving out west? I kind of know some of this, but
yeah. So Rolling Green, I was there almost 2 years. We had some really good times. I did something crazy.
Shocking.
Yeah. My second year there, I had drilled all the fairways. And that golf course had Pencross fairways, Pencross POA fairways.
Mm-hmm.
But it was interesting because all the POA was in the traffic areas. Anywhere it was a pinch point, there was POA. But generally, it was pretty good bent grass in the other places. But it was probably 60-40 bent. And what I did was I took that old 548 seeder, doubled up the cutter wheels on it, the blades,
mm-hmm.
shifted everything over, and I went out and plowed fairways basically with that thing.
Really?
And
just ripped it up.
Yeah, and we were getting down probably 1.5 inches. And I was seeding into it ryegrass and bent grass. And I did that my first fall there.
What year is this?
This is 1982.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what happened was that spring, I just didn't turn the sprinklers on the fairways.
Really? In Philadelphia?
Well, we didn't have carts on fairways.
Okay.
So you could get away with it.
Yeah.
And so the place would all wilt, and the ryegrass popped up in those POA areas. And the next thing you know, by July 4th, I finally had to water, and there wasn't any POA left. I was young, and it didn't really care. Certainly
that was a great experiment.
Cavalier, and so we had perennial grass fairways.
Yeah.
And, the rye came up and covered things, and then the bent grass came up and started running.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we had relatively clean fairways. And now I tried the same thing on the greens and about toasted them, mind you. So this wasn't all good.
I was going to say, live and learn. You have to make mistakes in this business or you'll never grow.
But, the ball would roll 40, 50, 60 yards on fairways. And
Oh, there you go. On the ryegrass, yeah.
If it started wilting before lunch, I would think it would be time to water. And we
Oh,
watered.
that was your EC meter.
Yeah, I told everybody that it
Right.
Would give me indigestion.
Right.
And the guys would cheat because I'd go in for lunch and they'd water like the hillsides at 8 green and 11
Quick,
green.
Armen's in the bathroom. Let's water the
They thought
hillside.
I didn't know, which was
Right.
hilarious.
Right.
So I let them have their win, and those spots did need extra water.
Yeah. And they're all now superintendents, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
Probably.
yeah.
Which makes sense. So is that your last stint in the Philadelphia area?
That is, yes.
So you finally got out to the mountains.
Yeah, and I got a call from Billy Buchanan, who used to be the USGA Championship agronomist and the PGA Tour agronomist. Billy called me, and Joe Deutsch both called me within a day. I forget who was first, and said the job at Cherry Hills is open, and you need to apply.
How did you know him?
Billy?
Billy.
When Billy had worked for the USGA, he called on us, and when he was a championship agronomist, I worked with him at Marion along with Al Rabideau.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a good connection there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we became good friends, and so I applied to Cherry Hills, and one of the things I did, this is important for people to understand, is that Richie had set me up for success.
Yeah.
Okay, and I got a call from Richie at one point during the Open. He said, "Come up to the clubhouse. Go up to the clubhouse. You need to take Mr. Hannigan out on a golf course." So here I am, a kid.
Right.
And I got Frank Hannigan in the golf cart with me. And for those of you that don't know, Frank was the executive director of the USGA, went on to be a broadcaster with ABC and all that, and a great writer. Tremendous sense of humor. So Frank and I are driving around the golf course together.
And how old are you now?
I'm 23.
So you're a 23-year-old kid driving around Frank.
Yeah. Yeah, we're BSing like normal
Right.
guys. And I'm telling Frank what we're doing and all this. So the job at Cherry Hills comes open, and I call up Mr. Hannigan, which is what I called him in those years.
As you should.
And I said, "Mr. Hannigan," I said, "I don't know if you remember me." He goes, "Oh, Armen, I remember you." And I said, "Sir, I'm applying for the job at Cherry Hills Country Club, and I wondered if it would be appropriate, if you thought it was appropriate, to write me a letter of recommendation." And he said, "Well, Armen," he goes, "no problem with that." He goes, "Are you still at Marion?" I said, "No, sir, I'm at Rolling Green." He goes, "Oh, I love Rolling Green. That's one of my favorite golf courses." So only years later did I get a chance to see the letter he wrote.
Oh,
And
you never saw it. He didn't give it to you. He sent it to them.
Yeah, and the letter he wrote said that he didn't know if I could grow grass, but I ran the U.S. Open at Marion. So here's a kid who had a guy in a golf cart with him for, a half hour, 45 minutes. And he writes that kind of letter to Cherry Hills. Now, something I didn't know, I'm a relationship guy, Joel, always have been.
Yeah.
But I never practiced it. It just kind of happened by accident. What I didn't know was that the general manager at Cherry Hills, Joe Vincent, who one of the great general managers in the country and where I learned that side of the business from, Joe actually, when he hired Teddy Horton away from Westchester, when Joe was at Westchester, he hired Teddy away from Wingfoot, paid Teddy more than he was making.
Really?
He was that kind of GM. He said, "I knew if Teddy gave me the golf course he could give me, that they'd give me anything I wanted."
Right. I would be successful for a long time.
That's a smart general manager.
That's a very smart general manager.
Yeah. So I didn't know the relationships. So Jim Hand, former president of the USGA, was Joe Vincent's first club president and a mentor of his when Joe was a GM at Sleepy Hollow, before he went to Westchester, before he came to Cherry Hills. And they remained friends forever.
Yeah.
And Jim Hand and Frank Hannigan were big buddies. So here I am with this great recommendation from Hannigan. So my stock immediately rises.
Right. Right?
Yeah. And so I go into an interview at Cherry Hills. My plane's 6 hours late. I get there at 2 a.m.
Oh.
And, and I'm misbehaving the whole way, like
Of
usual.
course.
And I have an 8 o'clock interview.
Oh.
And I go in there and I just, do what I normally do and talk about what I believe in. And ended up getting the job at Cherry Hills. And I was there. We had a PGA championship the next year.
Yeah.
Which, that's a story unto itself.
Yeah, I've heard that story actually.
Yes. Where I battled with the PGA of America from a year before the event and won every point.
And how did the championship go?
Went really well. But they came in, and you young superintendents are going to find this unbelievable. They wanted the green speeds to be 10 feet for a PGA championship. Yeah. So it's a year before the event, and we're sitting at the round table in the men's grill, and I'm arguing with them that 10 feet's too slow, that they'll tear the golf course up. And the president of the club is kicking me under the table to shut up, and I won't shut up. Because I'm right. I know what's going to happen if it's 10 feet. And so I said, at one point I said, the whole PGA of America board was there. I said, I want anybody that's ever played a William Flynn golf course before today to raise their hand. I stick mine up in the air. None of them stick their hand up in the air. I said, so let me see if I understand this right. I'm the only person that's ever worked at a Flynn golf course. I've done major championships. I know Flynn. I know this golf course. And I'm telling you 10 feet's too slow.
And what year is this?
84.
Okay.
So I'm what, 26?
Yeah. You're still a punk kid.
Yeah. I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
But I do think I'm right, and I was right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Cherry Hills is a Flynn golf course, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. So just in case somebody doesn't know that, one of my absolute favorite architects, by the way, Lehigh Country Club.
My favorite.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of great courses.
Other than maybe what, the work I've done. He was my favorite.
Huntington Valley. I mean, there's some great ones. Lancaster Country Club. I mean, there's just some wonderful places that he's done.
So we go into the championship, and Thursday, Friday, I give them 10 feet. Now the fairways, we've mowed fairways. Are you ready for this? Under a quarter of an inch all year.
Oh, really?
It's, I come from Philly. Here, the soil temps, you can grow roots all year long. Most years you can grow roots all year long in Denver.
Yeah.
So you can't really if you get banged up, you can recover.
Yeah, quickly. Not like the armpit of the world that Philly is. Transition zone.
What you have in the middle of May is what you have.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the fairways are stimping all year between 6 and 7 into the low 7s. And they want greens at 10. So now I had issues, of course. We had some low spots, and we got 2 inches of rain a month before, and we had some challenging spots on the 17th fairway. We paid for that a little bit. It wasn't good for anybody except for my ego. I was, just a dumb kid.
Right.
And so we go Thursday, Friday, they're shooting lights out. I've given them 10 feet, a little bit more, but basically 10 feet. So Friday night, I see the PGA of America guys, and I said, you know what, guys? Now, you got to remember, Valentine's in town.
Right.
Joe Dewich is in town.
Right.
Teddy Horton's in town. Alonzi's in town, and they're all busting me. And the
You're
members are busting me.
You're the little kid in the group.
Yeah, they're busting me because the players are shooting lights out.
Right.
And I'm angry because I know I was right. So I see the PGA of America guys at a dinner, and I said, you know what, guys? For 2 days you had it your way. Tomorrow it's my way. I said the greens are going to be faster.
You changed this in the middle of the tournament.
Yeah. They said, you can't do that. I said, you watch me. So I chained a roller up. We had this old cast iron. This is a Valentine trick. During the Open, we put rollers at every walkout exit of every green. We didn't use these rollers. They're old tennis rollers from the Marion Cricket Club.
Yeah.
And we did it just to get into the players' heads. That's Richie, right? So I find we have this old cast iron roller, heavy duty thing, and I chained it up to a tree in front of the golf shop. So if you walk out of the golf shop or from the practice tee to either the 10th tee or the first tee, you had to walk past this roller.
This is during the tournament.
Yeah, this is Saturday morning. This is what the players say.
Great.
Yeah. And then we had these weight trays, and after we mowed the greens, we had 40, 50, 60 pounds weight on the mowers, and the guys mowed. And at this point, Ed Miller, Brad Hines, Doug Brooks, We had 6 guys that were on the top 100 jobs at Cherry Hills on that crew.
Yeah, yeah.
They kept me out of a lot of trouble. They didn't keep me out of this one, but they kept me out of a lot of trouble up to this point. So here we are, and all of a sudden, it's 90 degrees.
Right.
The wind starts blowing. The humidity drops low double digits, maybe into the single digits.
Oh, no.
The greens get rock hard. You know that thump sound that a ball makes as it bounces over the pin?
Right.
Yeah. So the players go crazy because
of course.
Yeah. The greens really were only like a foot or so faster. I think we were like mid 11s or something. It wasn't a big deal. But the greens were really firm and they couldn't get close. And of course, the rough around the greens was long and we combed it.
Yeah. Were you able to blame all this on Mother Nature?
No. So
you got blamed for it.
Yeah. In the press and everything. It was fun. So we have an executive meeting. It's the PGA of America, the general manager, and the general chairman of the event, and me Saturday afternoon.
Oh,
where they
great.
tell me that they have a contract that says they control the condition of the golf course. And I said, yes, you do. I agree with that. You do. I said, tell you what, I'll do anything you want as long as you write it down and sign it. They said, why? I said, because as soon as you do that, I'm going to go down to the press tent and I'm going to hold a press conference. I'm going to tell the press that you want the golf course set up for the best players in the world easier than we set it up for the member guest. They said, well, you can't do that. I said, show me your contract where it says I can't do that. Now, mind you, the general chairman of the event hasn't said a word. I'm carrying the water on this deal.
Great.
And they said, well, we don't want you to do that. I said, but I don't want to make the greens softer or slower. They said, you got to give us something. I said, I'll tell you what, you pick one. I'm either make them a little slower or a little softer, but you only get one. They said, okay, a little softer. And can you slow the 5th green down because we're running out of pin placements?
Great.
I said, you'll love this. I said, I'll give you 2 turns on the sprinkler.
That was your softer?
Yeah. What's that, a heavy dew?
Yeah, exactly.
When your humidity's nothing?
Yeah, that's not softer, actually.
No.
Probably, evaporated out very quickly. Who won that? We were very fortunate to be able to get Steve Rabideau from Wingfoot Country Club here on the podcast. Jack Higgins, our lead agronomist, who has been working with Steve for quite a while, was able to talk to him at length just after the Open. And if you remember, last year's U.S. Open was delayed because of COVID. And of course, they didn't get to have any fans on the golf course for the Open. But Jack has a wonderful conversation about all the work that went into the Open and about Steve's background. But here's a small piece of this podcast. And if you'd like to see the entire podcast, it is in our archive. So go to our website and or subscribe to the podcast, and you'll be able to hear the entire interview. Here's Steve Rabideau and Jack Higgins.
Yeah, that's cool. And then, of course, what was it, about 8 or 9 years ago that you left and went to Wingfoot?
I started in December of 2011.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'm 9 years. starting my 10th season. Yeah.
That's amazing. Now, the Open was already in the books at that point. They were already slated to have it, or no?
No, not really. I didn't know that when I was interviewing. I think the talks were ongoing, but it was official in I think it was March maybe of 2013 we found out. So I did a full year, 2012. I'd heard talks of it and they were trying to finalize it, and then it was announced that it was official in early 2013.
Okay.
So, and at that point we had already started to do some of the construction work we were doing here.
Now, you had already, I think around that point, or maybe before, you were starting to establish kind of your core management team that stayed with you right through this year, hosting the U.S. Open. Who's that?
Well, the only guy, the 2 guys that have been with me since early on, Wes and Neff.
Yeah.
Wes came with me from Wheatley.
That's right.
Wes came up and he he started out here as an intern and just sort of worked his way all the way up. Actually, he started as an assistant here, an entry-level assistant, and worked his way up. He was U.S. Open superintendent this past year and has now gone on to get a superintendent job down at Oyster Harbors. JR was with me.
JR.
Yeah, JR interned at Wheatley a couple years, and then he came up here. Those first few years, though, we had some guys that were short-lived, that were in and out, and a bunch of them got jobs and stuff. But Wes was the staple from day one here.
Yes.
And he just left.
Yeah. Well, congrats to him. So let's see. Let's talk a little bit about some of the preparations that you started at that point, getting ready, because I know you prepared for many years out. I remember Joel telling me that he would go up to Wingfoot when Paul Latshaw was the superintendent there, and the big story was all the trees that they were taking down. But then I think Rabby took a lot of trees down too. So it was a place just like a tree factory.
Yeah, it definitely was. It was overgrown. You were hard pressed to be able to look from one fairway through to another fairway. They had taken a lot of trees out prior to me getting here. But then when we started the project with Gil, the first project we did was a practice facility project.
Okay.
Which was in the fall of 2012. We actually, the last piece of sod down the day before Hurricane Sandy hit. We did we took what was one large green, took a bunch of trees down around the clubhouse, around the practice area, and made, what do we make? Four greens, one large putting green and 3 chipping greens, and a hitting area. So that was a big project that we did year one. And that sort of got some of the juices flowing for the membership, and they were happy with Gil and I think myself. And at that point, they wanted to do some work on the East Course.
Well, what a smart way to start, restoration like that. So you're saying this was you kind of developed this cool practice area that's right up at the clubhouse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everyone sees it. They, like you said, it's a good way to kind of sell the bigger project.
Well, it sells the project, but also, listen, trust is earned, right? And they were happy with what Gil did. They were happy with what we did, and what we did as a team together, all of us in LeBar Golf. And it was one of LeBar's first projects. And then Gil at the time was asked to develop a plan for the East and the West, and we started on the East that following fall. So things picked up, and I had no idea all this work was even going to take place when I was hired. So I mean, we've been 9 years nonstop construction on one thing or another.
Yeah, and like you said, even today, you're still the restoration and construction never really stops. There's
we're doing stuff now that we had done 8 years ago.
Right,
so back. we're just going in and just it's nice to be able to do that, right? I mean, I don't know, we're fortunate that we can do those things, but we're just trying to recapture that back edge of the green where the grass sort of creeps in. We have Billy bunker liners, so we can find the original size of the bunker and just go in on those faces that have gotten beat up and worn down and stuff, and just resod them and restack them. So
yeah. So the Billy bunker, when did that go in? Probably 7-8 years ago.
Well, it went in when we were doing the green. So the practice facility was done first, and then fall of 2013 we did the front 10 holes on the east. Okay. That opened up in the spring of 14. Okay. So the Billy bunker was done then. We rebuilt every green. Mm-hmm. We rebuilt every bunker. We rebuilt almost every tee. We had a drainage plan that was being done, a master drainage plan that was implemented.
Now, rebuilding every green, what is that? Does that mean shelling out and coming in with a new mix, or yeah. Okay. So new mix, new drainage, and
sub-air. We scanned the greens. We laser scanned the greens because that was when we started the project. That was the most important to the membership. So the one thing that they were really leery on, we told them that we could put the green contours back to exactly what they were. And they were very apprehensive, and they didn't know if we could do it. And listen, I get it. I mean, so when we first started the project on the east, on the front of the east, we had, our club historian was out there with trail cameras, cameras in the trees, filming us and watching us, and he was there nonstop, checking up on us. But when you use a laser scanning technology and you scan it before, during, and after, we can show them that it went back as close to what it was when we started. So, and then when we started, once we did the front 10 and they played on him in the summer of 14, they liked that 10 holes. They really liked the performance of them. And that was at that time that, because when we started the East, they said we were never going to do anything on the West greens. The West is the open golf course. They didn't want to touch the West course at all.
Okay.
But once they started playing on it and seeing the performance of it and how they drained and the firmness and that what we did, what we said we could do, that's when they wanted to do the West golf course. So that's when the West picked up. So we started the back of the East in the fall of 14 and finished that in spring of 15. So it opened up in May of 15. May of 15? We did 12, it was 13, 14, 15. Yeah. And then in 16, we hosted the USA 4-ball championship on the East.
Right.
And then we started, and then before that, then that's when it picked up steam that they want to do the West course. And we started the West course in the fall of 16. So we started 16, finished, opened in 9 holes. We did the back first. The back 9 opened in spring and May of 17. And then we did the front 9 started in fall of 17 and opened in May of 18. So we had 2 seasons to get those greens to where we wanted them for the Open.
Wow. And
that was the same thing. We scanned them, rebuilt all the greens. The West, we put sub-air vaults in. We did all the bunkers, Billy bunker. We did all the tees, rebuilt all the tees, drainage. We actually did the one thing we changed on the West that we didn't do on the East was that we did it the variable depth, variable mix.
Oh, this is so cool. Yeah, go ahead. Now that means, go ahead, explain that to everyone what exactly that means, the variable depth.
So on the East course, we did the mix was 12 inches. So we did a uniform 12 inches of mix on top of the 4 inches of gravel. But on the West, and we noticed that when we built those greens that, the ridges would get hotter, and our greens are severe. And then the middles of the greens, which is a lot where our cupping areas are, would just stay a little bit wetter. Not a lot, but they would stay just a little bit wetter. So the variable depth, and the USA knows about it, it's just hard to build. But when we're taking something and scanning it and going back to the same, you have to manipulate the floor. But what we were doing is we were going to put 10 inches, so about 2 inches less on the ridges.
Okay.
So that less mix is going to hold the moisture. And in the cupping areas and then in our false fronts and in the cupping areas where the water might sit, we put more mix. We put 14 inches of mix.
So you're 2+ on the 2+ on the low sides and 2- on the minus
on the ridges.
Right.
So where you want to hold the moisture on the ridges, we put less, and where we want to drain quicker, we put more mix. And
so it's easy on paper, but for the shaper and for the guys that are doing it, that's probably a challenge.
It's a challenge, but when we're doing it, because see, when we built the greens, we know our endpoint, right? Our zero is our endpoint, and we're using a total robotic station where the data goes in there. So we took the green in the scan and we drew a map on it. And then we had that process so that when we were using the grading instrument and the computer on it, which is called the total robotic station, we were looking at a map on there.
Okay.
And then when you're wherever you are on that green, it shows an X of where you're at. And then we would look at that, and if we were in an area where it was supposed to be a 10, we would not go down the 12. We would not go down as deep, right? We would manipulate the floor. So it would say on the instrument, cut 1.66. 1.66 surveying feet is 2 inches.
Okay.
A 0.166. So
Okay.
we would manipulate the floor. And then on a area where we're trying to go 14, it would tell us that we overcut it. It would say fill. So we had to manipulate the floor.
Right.
Because you want the end to be the same.
So once you got that shell right, once you got that floor right, like you're saying,
had to do you had to do the floor. You had to manipulate the floor because the finish is going to be the same. So the only way you can do that is you manipulate the floor. And
cool.
So we got, that's how we did that. And then we would do that the same for the gravel layer because the gravel layer had to match that. So the floor and the gravel layer had to match that. The same thing.
Because it's the new floor. The gravel layer becomes the new floor. Right.
Right. The gravel layer is the same as the floor. It's just with gravel on it.
Right.
And then we would put the mix on it. But that we're getting to 0. That's our finish point.
Yes.
So when we're using that instrument, we would set a vertical offset. Right. We had to calibrate the machine every day. And 16 inches was our vertical offset from the top.
Right.
12 inches of mix.
For a gravel.
But then we would change that on the floor and either be going 18 or going 14 inches because you had to add in the 4 inches of gravel.
So then all said and done, you got grass on the greens, you're going out with your TDR and you're reading 6%, 6%, 6%, 6%, maybe not 6, but you're reading consistent on the lows or the highs.
It's much more the variability of it is much tighter. Where when we would go to the East Course, you would have a wider range of numbers, between the lows and the highs, and it's a lot tighter on the West greens, and especially. It's more so for us, it was more important in the cupping areas because that's where all the traffic is. And we're a busy golf course and you're not thinning out because you're holding moisture. We also did it on all of our false fronts. We have a lot of false fronts. So we did it for playability in those areas so that the ball, it would hit and bounce, right? Because, USGA greens, the water goes down, hits the gravel, and where does it run? It all runs to the front of the green.
Exactly.
And that's where that's where the
drain and the whole deal.
Right. So we had more mix there so that those fronts would be firmer. I mean, you wouldn't think a couple inches makes a lot of difference, but it does, So we don't have any wet spots in the fronts of our greens. So it's
which then, maintenance all summer long, you're coming around with your cut and all of that. If it's wet, it thins out by the time by August, and also everybody walking up the front of the green, the whole deal. So managing that moisture is so key.
Yeah.
You did mention, and I knew this, that Wingfoot is not one of these like 8,000 rounds a year golf courses.
No. We're pumping 20-ish, give or take, probably a little bit more per golf course, 20,000. We're open year round. I got the East Course open. There'll be people playing today, year round.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. So, and you maintain excellent conditions all year round. Like for example, you host a USGA event on the non-open golf course at your place. I mean, that's wild, right?
The East Course has had 2 women's opens. It's had a senior open. It's had 4-ball championship. It's been part of two amateurs. It's had Shell's Wide World of Golf. It's had a Walker Cup on the 2. So the East Course is no slouch.
No. Now, what is the annual tournament at Wingfoot that you have every year? The Anderson Cup, right?
Yeah, the Anderson Memorial. Yep.
And what is that? That's for membership?
No, the Anderson is an invitational event. It's been here. It's one of the largest and oldest invitationals in the country. It's been here for 90 90 some odd years, I think, or 91 or 92 years.
Very
Um, and it gets some of the best amateurs. It's a partner event.
Okay.
Teams from all over the U.S. Usually somewhat like 6 to 8 other countries. People come. It's a 5-day event. It's a big event. You know, they play both golf courses and practice rounds and everything. And it's if you're in the golfing, that amateur circuit, you
Yeah.
want.
You want to get that invite to the Anderson.
Yeah, one person gets an invite, and then he gets to invite a guest, but they both have to be from the same club. So,
Oh, very cool.
yeah, it's a big event.
Well, now let's move forward to the year 2020. We're starting the calendar year in January, about 1 year ago. We're all amped up and excited because in June is going to be the big US Open that you've been preparing for 7 years. And I was actually around that first week in March. I think I came by, which was like the week that the world shut down.
Yeah.
And it really shut down in Westchester County first. It was one of the first places where there was a hotspot of COVID cases, New Rochelle, right there where you are.
Well, I live in New Rochelle.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that story. It was like, can Steve get to work?
Yeah, I had people calling me from all over the country going, are you like in lockdown? And I'm like, no, I mean, nothing changed. They said the National Guard was there. I never saw the National Guard. But yeah, that shut down, and we were getting really ready to crank, and January and February were nice, and we were out and we were paving the roads that we had to pave and prepping, and
yeah, you were laying floors the day I was there.
Yeah, laying rock and floors, and we had we were rocking and rolling. There's probably 100 people running around doing stuff, and that next Monday, USJ pulled the plug on the 19th, March 19th. I remember that week. It was a shitty week because it was the NBA pulled the plug, NHL pulled the plug. Tom Brady told the Patriot fans on St. Patrick's Day on the 17th that he was leaving the Pats.
I actually have that written down to bring up.
And then 2 days later, the USJ pulled the plug on the Open. Not pull the plug on, but they stopped.
Right. We have to figure out what we're going to do, sort of thing.
Right, because that next Monday everything was ready on 16 to start building the trophy club, and everything was out there, and then things shut down, and then it was, what do you do?
Oh, what a kick in the pants.
Yeah.
And then they just kept moving the goalpost, I guess.
Well, nobody knew what was up, so it was, there was a month in there till about the middle of April until we had no idea what was going to happen. There was no USJ people. We didn't know if we were going to have it. So everybody at that point was trying to scramble all the golf, PGA and European and USJ. Everybody was trying to fight for the dates of when they were going to move everything to. And so there was a month that we didn't know what was going on. COVID hit. What is COVID? What are we doing? Trying to keep guys safe. We moved outdoors. We had an outdoor break room. We didn't bring anybody else back. So we had 25 people on staff. When normally come, April, we were going to be 61, I think, this year.
Yeah.
We had 25 people that maintained both golf courses, 25 total, March, April, May, and the first week or two of June. That we had 25 people.
Yikes! 2 golf courses and a U.S. Open.
Yep. So we didn't want to bring anybody else back because people were still out of the country, and we didn't know where people were and stuff. So we said, you know what, we're going to do it with what we have. And it wasn't until mid-April that they said that we were going to have it in the fall.
Okay.
There was a period there that we thought we was going to get pulled from us. That wasn't good. But then it was, all right, we're going to have the date in September, but then we had no idea what it was going to look like.
Right.
We love to have agronomy conversations here at EarthWorks, and we do it all the time. And 3 of our favorite agronomists are Dave Wilber, Lawrence Mayhew, and Bill McKibben. And in this particular piece, Kevin Hicks and I were able to do a series of conversations with our favorite, Dave Wilber, who is one of our most popular podcast guests. And Kevin and I talk about water with Dave. And in fact, this was part one of two-part series. So if you haven't seen our series on water, anybody that's growing turf or any kind of plant material is going to benefit from this series. And I would encourage you to go back into the archives and listen to the conversations that we had with Dave Wilber. And this is a snippet from the Dave Wilber Water Podcast. Hi, everybody. I'm Joel Simmons, and this is the EarthWorks Podcast. And every week we come to you with some interesting tidbits, some interesting guests. And today is no exception. We have my cohort in crime, Mr. Kevin Hicks, who most of you know. And we have one of our favorites, Mr. Dave Wilber, independent consultant and friend of a very long time ago.
Hey.
If you are not a subscriber to our podcast, please be. We will send you information on what we're doing every week, and you'll get notification of some wonderful things. Today, the three of us are going to talk about a subject matter that I think is a bit confusing for a lot of folks, especially in the turf industry, and one that probably is a little bit of a challenge. We're going to spend today talking about the water report, and Dave has agreed to spend some time with us as we throw questions his way and talk about what the water report looks like. How do you kind of get through it all? How do you make sense of it? And I guess, Dave, probably the best thing to do is, first of all, thank you for joining us. As you know, you are one of our favorite guests and one of our most popular guests, and it's always a pleasure. And for those of you who haven't heard the three of us before, I would not have met Mr. Hicks if it wasn't for Dave Wilber. And of course, Kevin now being very integral to our organization. So there's a strong old connection going here on this triad of ours today. But let's dive into this. I think probably the best place to start, Dave, is we're going to get into the numbers, but let's talk about how do you actually pull a water sample? I mean, what's the best strategy of getting that done?
Yeah, Joel. Well, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me, you guys, and I'm honored. I'm honored. I think the way that we had a little brief meeting the other day talking about getting this together, and it was pretty clear to me that, the way I thought it might be fun to approach this is just to look at it from, having been the guy who's delivered, literally thousands of water reports, to golf course superintendents, and you guys, doing the same, right? Thousands of soil reports, thousands of water reports.
Do we really understand them?
Yeah. Is what is the key to understanding this information? Because so many times I would get to, especially somebody that I had never worked with before or whatever, you get to their office and out comes the big binder, full of tests. And it really doesn't, it's not the tool that it could be. It's almost like they've picked the box and said, well, I have to get a test, right? Yeah. Certainly it's that way with soil tests. With water tests, it's even worse because if they have them, it's confusing, and usually a lot of times they don't have them. Why would I test my water?
Yeah,
I don't need to do that. It is what it is.
Yeah. Right? And I can't change it, generally speaking. I'm not in a position to afford or want to or understand how to change it, and so why bother testing?
Right? Why bother and all that sort of stuff. So I think what I hope that we get accomplished today is obviously some good technical discussion about what this water report means, why to do it, what you can do with the information when you have it, and how to best understand potentially the changes or the seasonal changes that happen in your waters, and why to continue to monitor that. And then the last thing, and I think which is the key thing, is understanding that really it's your biggest input.
Right.
It's the thing that you have more control over in a way than anything else. And often, especially in the case of poor quality waters, it is your biggest application, as far as the bad stuff that could be in that water.
It's your biggest red flag, right?
Absolutely.
And it affects everything. It affects the soil. It affects your spray tanks. It affects everything.
Everything.
And we don't understand it all that well, quite honestly. And I can't tell you how many times I go into a client's office and we review soil tests, and they may not have run a water test in 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's stunning that we just haven't done a good job, I guess, from our end in helping people really discover the real value of what this data is all about. So that's why we're here. That's why you're here.
Going back a number of years, in my own case, you stop at the first line on the test and you go, I guess I'm in the range. I'm good.
Yeah.
Right. Number one. And number two, who taught us how to read them?
Yeah.
So like you said, it's in the binder, check the box, but it didn't do what it should be able to do for us.
It's that tool that is potentially a great tool that is hidden away, and it shouldn't be. It should be part of your daily thinking and conversation. So that's what I want to do. So Joel, you said, you mentioned sampling, which is
Let's start with that.
Yeah, it's the first key to the success of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And let's say, if you're listening to this in whatever situation you're in, you're holding a sample bottle. I thought I had one here somewhere. I have a Scotch bottle, but that's not gonna work.
No, don't use that. Or your spittoon bottle. Don't use that either.
Yeah, no. I've got my protein shaker. But anyway, you're holding a water bottle, and it's like, okay, what do I do? How do I sort out what's happening? And so the first thing is let's just make a quick delineation between if you're on a reclaimed water source, versus anything else that isn't reclaimed. So potable water, well water, all that sort of stuff. But reclaimed water is a different animal. Mm-hmm. And the reason it's a different animal is because there's a gas exchange process that goes on when they do tertiary treatment. There's some additives there to control the bacteria, right? The human health side of it. And they are continuing to react. So if you're a reclaimed water user, the first step is you got to get 2 of those bottles, right? And the first one is going to get filled from a quick coupler or, a reclaimed source, wherever. And it's going to get capped right away and left on your desk. The second sample is a little more, it's not tricky, but it's got to be thought through, is you're going to grab that sample in a small bucket or something like that and let it sit open. Just open.
For how long?
24 hours is best. A minimum of 12.
And we're talking reclaimed water.
Yeah, reclaimed water only.
And what you're trying to do is you're trying to gas off whatever is in there.
Yeah. And then you're going to take that bottle and pull a sample out of that bucket and cap it. Now, why? So the example is kind of like the can of Coca-Cola. When I first open the can, it's fizzing, right? It's respirating. There's gases in there.
Off gassing.
Yeah, and if I stick a pH meter in there, it's going to be, kind of acidic, right? Well, after, an hour, 2 hours or whatever, the gases are gone. The Coke is flat now, and it has a different pH. And the reason I'm telling this story is because it fits into some other things that we're going to talk about later. But the sugars and all the junk that's in the Coca-Cola is still there, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you're going to get 2 different readings with that one thing, with the pH thing. So with reclaimed water, because it's still respirating, you've got to pull 2 samples and compare those.
So you're sending both samples in.
You're sending both samples in. So you guys that are running reclaim, sorry, but it's it's double the work, but it's worth it. There's some differences that happen in that water, and we don't want to make decisions until we've seen both sides of that picture.
So which one more closely mirrors what's actually hitting the ground through an irrigation head?
Probably the second one, Kevin.
The off gas.
That's been gassed off.
Yeah, if you had to pick, and one of the people that I learned this technique from just used to say, just pull a reclaim sample and let it respirate in the bucket, and then pull 1 sample. We've learned to pull 2 just so that we can illustrate the differences.
Okay.
Especially for people that are, fertigating and doing some different stuff like that. It's like, what is that water like when it first comes out of the pipe to me? that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So let's go back to basic sampling technique, though. If I'm just a regular guy on a well or on a thing, what am I doing? I've always told people to pull it off as close to the grass as they can. Does that make sense?
Right. That's a great place to start. And the only time that doesn't really work is if we have some drastically different sources. Let's say that you've got a well that only gets used when you're really starting to run out of water, and you've got another water source like the runoff water or the creek or whatever that runs through the golf course. We probably want to know about both of those sources,
right?
But from a practicality standpoint, and this is where we'll lead into the seasonal thing. From a practicality standpoint, you're going to want to use whatever is coming to the grass. So I always like to go to that quick coupler or that valve or whatever that's farthest away from the pumping point or from the lake or whatever, clear across the golf course, pull a sample there.
A lot of guys will go and dip into the pond. Does that make sense?
Dipping into the pond is okay, but you run the risk of sampling the pond scum and the stuff that's flying in the air that gets to the top. So if you do that, and there's nothing wrong with dipping in the pond, if you do that, you've got to kind of hold the bottle. I'm not going to do it with a Scotch bottle, but you've got to hold the bottle upside down and get it way under the water and then tip it and let it draw, not from the top. Don't scoop it from the top, because that can really make a difference.
Here's another question, Dave, that's similar to this before we get into the actual numbers. How frequently do you recommend a golf course superintendent or sports turf manager to test? How frequently during the season?
So there's no question that water quality changes through the course of the season.
Right.
Wells draw down, things change and all that sort of stuff. There's a great story. Lou Tonelli, golf course superintendent from the Lake Merced Club near San Francisco. I think Lou was there longer than I was alive when I was working with him. I mean, he was. He started it, before I was born. But Lou told me one time, because we were talking about when to pull samples, and he said, right around September, they start to call me, and he was working mostly on well water at that point. They call me from the clubhouse and tell me the sprinklers are messing up the windows and they can't get them clean. Happens about September, he said. Right?
And this is well water.
This is well water.
Right.
And in the same couple of sentences, he also said that, towards the end of the season, his water is a little more tricky because two of his wells aren't producing as much as they would in the spring.
Yeah. And just so people know where Lou was at in the San Francisco Bay Area, real close to the San Francisco Club and the Olympic Club. So that area of the world.
In a place where it doesn't rain all summer.
Right. Exactly.
It might get foggy, but you're not going to get much measurable rain. So Lou knew intuitively that his water changed, and he knew when it changed because that's when they called him from the clubhouse and told him that the windows were, and they had to go up with the special acid wash and get the bicarbonate off the windows. Right? Okay. So that's a hint. Well water quality is going to change. Runoff water quality is going to change. Salts are going to concentrate. So I want people to test at the beginning and the end of their season.
Well, and likewise, one of the tests we're going to look at, he's got a very high influx of treated effluent water during the winter months.
Right.
And then he switches over to surface sources in the summer because there's nobody there. There's snowbirds and they've gone home.
Because it's the opposite climate thing.
Right.
Exactly.
And the same thing happens with normal city waters is that they'll treat them harder in the summer months because, it's higher potential for contaminants. So there's more chlorine in city water in the summer months.
Correct.
Tell me if I'm wrong with this, Dave, but for years I've been talking, especially new clients that I don't know their soil profiles or their water tests. I like to run 4 tests, spring, summer, fall, and then the winter test, at least that first year, so that we can kind of get it. What it does for the conversation that we're having with the superintendent is it gives us that opportunity to say, this is the changes that you're going to see happening. So be ahead of the curve and understand that, when you get into June, July, and August in the heat of the summer, things are a little bit different than what you were. I also remember vividly Susan Chainer calling me in say February, and she ran a number of water samples and they were so clean. And it turned out what it was literally snow melt. So water changes. It changes.
Water Water changes, it changes from, where it comes from. The other thing I think people do sometimes is they'll go pull that springtime sample when they first turn on their wells, if they're on well water. And
Good.
actually you got to run those for, for a week or so.
Yeah.
Before you pull that, sample. Because a lot, that water can just be sitting there,
yeah,
all winter down deep, and there's, some concentrations that happen there. We've seen that before. We've definitely seen early spring water tests out of a well that looked like, oh my God, this is scary. And then pull another sample a couple weeks later just to double check ourselves, and it's okay. This is what we
flushed
expect.
itself through. Yeah, that makes. I never even thought of that. That's brilliant. Let me ask you this question real quick. We obviously here at EarthWorks work with Logan, but aren't most laboratories running very similar test methodologies? I mean, I know soil tests can vary from lab to lab, but I have found, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I've always thought that most laboratories, commercial laboratories, the water sampling is fairly consistent. Am I wrong in that?
You're not wrong in that at all, Joel. What changes drastically is just the reporting.
Gotcha.
What they report and all that sort of stuff. And I definitely have some things, and I think we'll get to it when we go through the test today, about what needs to be on a report that's going to help us in
right. Well,
the other thing is, I mean, just to say that, a lot of times a reclaimed water provider or even a city water provider will say, well, we've got tests, right? And they'll send the superintendent something and say, this is good enough. But what that's all about is, is what we call Title 22. It's all about human contaminants, right? It's all about the things they have to do to be regulated. It means very little for agronomic suitability.
So that's a great point, and I'm glad you brought that up. I would have forgot that as well, but I get that often in that, they get what I call the Hollywood sample, but it's not an agricultural sample.
No.
It's a potability sample. And a lot of guys, unfortunately, they'll look at that and say, oh yeah, no, my water's pretty clean. They sent me this sample.
They've all got pH on them. They've all got, some TDS on them, and, some things like that. So it looks like the thing, but it's not the thing. And if you go to a lot of labs websites or whatever, they'll have a agricultural suitability. I guess what I'm getting to is you don't want the water test that the guys selling the water softeners like to look at.
Exactly. Yeah. Or the pool guys, the guys that are running your pool water. You don't want that test. That's a pH test.
Or the guys that are running reclaimed water and they don't want anybody to get sick. We don't, we're not looking for, that kind of testing. So agricultural suitability in the lab world is the key phrase.
I keep coming up with questions for you before we get into the detail where we really want to be, but I just thought of another one. I've often said this to some guys on especially on the reclaimed water. Is there any flexibility within the superintendent's realm to be able to talk to the reclaimed water people and say, can you clean this up at all? Can you make this a little bit better? This is killing me. I mean, is there a way they can go and talk to somebody down at the plant and say, stop it?
It's funny because, Joel, I always tell superintendents that are taking reclaimed, I always ask them one of my Columbo kind of questions, because I think a good consultant asks a lot of questions.
Yeah.
Is I'll say, what's your relationship like with your water provider?
Good.
And some superintendents will say, oh yeah, I know those guys at the plant, and we talk every once in a while when they're going to slow down or when they're going to speed up or when they need that kind of thing. The worst answer is, no, I don't know anything about that. I just I turn on the valve, the water comes out. I don't know those guys. But the thing is that there's a bunch of different ways now. There's 3 main methods that they disinfect that water with. There's a sodium chloride product, there's a calcium chloride product. It's sodium hypochlorite and calcium hypochlorate, or vice versa. It doesn't matter. But there's a calcium oriented product, there's a sodium oriented product, and there's ultraviolet. Obviously, the ultraviolet has no chemical for disinfection. It is the best.
Would that be? Yeah.
It's also really expensive.
Yeah, right, and not used very often.
And older plants in out of the way places are not going to have the UV thing.
Yeah.
The newer standard is really UV. It's it has an operating cost only in power. You're not buying barrels of chemical. You're not dealing with totes of chemical or whatever, and injection rates and contact time and all that. Those guys work in that world. There's formulas for how much contact time. If I'm running the plant this fast, I have to use this much chemical in order to get this much contact time. And you can definitely have conversations with them about what they're using as a disinfectant and tell them, man, I'm really sodium sensitive. you know,
Yeah.
I'm really salt sensitive. I'm super sodium sensitive in my
Sure.
turf grass. Can we talk about that? You know? And a lot of times what you're doing is it's the same thing as you would be doing when you need a new mower or when you need something else, is you're helping this person write a case to his bosses and say, hey, we can do better for our downstream customer.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. Thank you for being a loyal listener to all of the podcasts. And again, if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe to the podcast. And feel free to give us a call here at EarthWorks if anybody has any kind of questions. But again, thank you so much. We will be back with another guest next week on the EarthWorks Podcast.